finally got round to watching the trailer for Gladiator 2, and while it looks awesome, I picked up on something that I just really hate. It's just so historically inaccurate and so many people believe it. Can you guess what it is? What's wrong with this image? That's right, the Colosseum has been flooded to host a naval battle. This was called a Naumachia, and this was a really impressive kind of game, something that happened a handful of times in Roman history when they really wanted to show off. But never in the Colosseum. The worst part of this is I started gaslighting myself when I went online to double check this, because there are all these articles stating that this happened in the Colosseum. Even Wikipedia says quite confidently that this was the case with multiple sources. But when you take a look at those sources, it starts to fall apart. Some of them actually state the exact opposite. So, let's have a quick review. The first large-scale Naumachia were held under Julius Caesar, in a big basin next to the Tiber. Augustus came next, the first emperor, and he also held a Naumachia with about 30 triremes and a bunch of other smaller ships. Now these were both in purpose-built artificial lakes, and Augustus even had to build an aqueduct just to provide enough water. Now when it comes to the Colosseum, the Naumachia often attributed to the Colosseum are those of Titus and Domitian. Now first of all, the poet Martial wrote several epigrams about the games of Titus, and several specifically about the Naumachia. In one of them, he heavily implies that they were held at a separate arena. I know that's not enough, but Suetonius also specifically states that the games were not held in the Colosseum, but in a separate venue, a purpose-built venue. For Domitian, the later historian Cassius Dio also states this, as does Suetonius. So they both state that Domitian held games, he held Naumachia, but not in the Colosseum. He held them somewhere else. Now Cassius Dio does also state that Titus held a Naumachia inside the Colosseum, and other people held them elsewhere in the same lake that Augustus had used. But I find it quite difficult to take his word over that of Suetonius and Martial, because they actually lived through the reign of Titus. Cassius Dio was not born for another 80 years. Under Domitian, the winding labyrinth of animal cages and machinery beneath the floor of the arena were constructed, and so it had been pretty much impossible after that to host a Naumachia. So could any Naumachia be held in the amphitheatre? Well yes, they certainly were, and they could even have the big fish and sharks that we see in the Gladiator trailer. The Emperor Nero flooded an amphitheatre in Rome, and there's evidence at the amphitheatres of Merida and Verona of waterproofing, specifically to create a basin for water events. However, these would be much smaller affairs. The basin at Merida is only 1.5 meters deep. That's shorter than I am. Even these modest arenas needed the supply of an aqueduct to create this pool of water to fill them up. Both waterproofing and sufficient water are absent from the Colosseum, which makes it much more improbable that these happened there. In theory, it is possible, but none of the evidence supports it. So what's the lesson here? You shouldn't believe everything you read online. Next time you read about these things on Wikipedia or social media, take the time to actually check the sources, because you would be surprised how often this sort of thing happens. If you're interested in more historical rants like this, then give me a like and subscribe and we'll see what I can do.